right, we're going to get started here. Let me put this down. My name is Marty Atkins, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for the library here, and I'm excited to see you all here this afternoon for Lane. Just got to make you aware of a couple things. I got to thank the Friends of Peter White Public Library because they pay for the live streaming equipment. So if you are watching on YouTube right now or after the fact, you can thank the Friends of Peter White Public Library for that. A couple things that are upcoming this week. Tomorrow night we have our fundraiser concert, singing the old songs again. That is tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. And that includes Gary Brandt and Jackie Davidson from the New Christie Minstrels. That is a ticketed event, so if you want tickets, there are 8 left. They're $5 a piece. So if you don't get a ticket, I'm sorry, you're going to have to watch it on live stream. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in that concert, to go up to the circulation desk and pick up your ticket after you're done here today. Okay? A couple other things. Let's see. Thursday night we have our monthly meeting of the Marquette Poet Circle, and on Friday I will be showing a film titled Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter, and that is in honor of Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Starts at noon right here in the community room, and it's a really, really moving documentary about a daughter who is helping her mother navigate an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So really, really great film. Lots of other things coming up. So pick up one of these September flyers. Also, my communications coordinator that I shared an office with would kill me if I didn't say this. We are right now in the taking surveys from people because it's strategic planning time here at Peter White Public Library. Well, believe me, I said the same thing when she handed me these. So if you can, this is really selfish of me too, but if you can pick up one of these, you use this and you can go and do this online. And she has told me that if we get 1,000 responses, she's buying a round of drinks at Black Rocks. So I really want to hit that 1,000 mark. We're only at about 60 right now, so we got a lot of work to do, people. So anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about Lane. I'm sure most of you are very aware of Lane's accomplishments. But Lane grew up on a 10-acre farm in Indiana where their mother cooked and their father gardened. And they've got a Master of Fine, I love this, a Master of Fine Arts in Writing from the Institute of Chicago. And has in an early career worked at such restaurants in Chicago as Iliana. I just learned how to pronounce that. And before they opened their own underground restaurant, Elizabeth, and eventually transferred here gratefully. We are so happy to have you in the UP, to the Upper Peninsula, and founded the Milkweed Inn with their wife. A couple things about books. Burn the Place was nominated for the National Book Award and was longlisted for that. And then the Fieldwork, their newest book, 2023, explores themes of ancestry, foraging, and their connection to the natural world. So please, please give a big Peter White Public Library welcome to Elaine.
Hi everybody. This is a nice turnout, and I always, whenever I'm doing an event, just expect that nobody's going to it. And, I think there's going to be like maybe 5 people if I'm lucky, and then I always am pleasantly surprised when there's a crowd. It's like, I just did one earlier this season at the Munising Public Library on kind of a crappy day, and there was a bunch of people there, so that was really amazing. Even some people who had been to Milkweed, so that was really sweet. So I was just talking to Marty, and we were thinking I would do some reading and then a little Q&A, if that's all right. Okay, excellent. I always kind of read some of the same things just because there's a couple parts in each book that I like the best. So one of these is from a chapter called Chanterelles in Burn the Place, and let's see. Find the part where I start. Have most of you read this book? Yeah. Okay. Great. So I'm just gonna try to find a spot so that it's not too long. All right. So where I'm gonna start here is basically my dad and I had just gone foraging with one of his friends. And we did this a lot on my grandpa's farm in Madeiraville, Indiana. When I was younger, we would go foraging there for morels in the spring and chanterelles in the summer and hen of the woods in the fall. They had a really good mix of trees there and a lot of old oak trees. So that was really nice for the hen of the woods mushrooms. So we had just gone foraging and there was a little sand tornado in a storm. So right now where I'm going to start is we're sort of running from that storm. We began to run, and as the wind grew stronger, I lurched forward beneath the weight of my dad's large hand over mine and struggled to stay with him. I felt like I was being pushed or chased by 1,000 ghosts, or maybe ghosts were running with me, brushing against me, trying to push me forward, over, out of the way. I imagined all the ghosts of Native Americans on their horses slicing through us. Rick stumbled, running as fast as he could, while I dragged behind my father. Suddenly, my dad stopped, quickly buttoned the mushrooms inside my coat, then hoisted me onto his back. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and he held my legs as tight as possible. It was frightening and thrilling all at once. Here is where being afraid became fun. I recognized this feeling for many years to come. We ran along the same path that always felt so peaceful when it was bathed in warm sunlight on Sundays when we picked berries. Now it was dangerous. The sand began to blow up around us. Rick charged like a football player as the sand cut around him in every which way. My father ran in his wake, and I closed my eyes. When we got to the next clearing, the wind took my father to the ground. Rick slid beneath the car. A large gray tunnel from the sky touched the ground at the horizon. The corn bent forward as if bowing in prayer. My father reached for me behind him, but I had already been picked up in a cyclone of sand. I was horizontal, rising up through the air, much the way I imagined how aliens would take me, or how I imagined Jesus ascending to heaven in Easter Mass. I don't remember all of this exactly. My memories are in large part informed by my father's telling of this story. I was picked up 10 feet high, spinning in the sand. He ran after me, and about 20 feet away, I fell into a pile of hay at the base of an oak tree. He checked my head and felt my bones, and as the wind blew, he stretched out over me, pressing all his weight to hold me to the ground. He held on to the base of the tree. After about 5 minutes, the wind let up. The sky opened, and it began to rain. We hurried to the car and headed in the opposite direction from where the storm was traveling. We bounced over the gravel roads to Route 421 and headed back north. The car rocked along with the wind, but we felt safer, and Rick cracked a window and lit a cigarette. I rested my head against the cooler and clutched the bag of chanterelles inside my jean jacket. I ran my hand over the handle of the small pistol my father had taught me how to use. My mother rushed to the car as we pulled up the driveway. She opened the car door before we even came to a full stop and swooped me into her arms. She knew something had happened, but she didn't know what. It was rare for my dad to be the calm one, but he assured her we were all fine. He avoided telling her about the sand tornado, and I avoided saying anything at all. Rick leaned against the car and opened another beer. My dad gave Rick a look that said, "Time to go, man." Inside, my mother changed me from my wet clothes while I repeated what I had learned about the mushrooms. They will smell like the earth, but taste like apricots and be spicy like peppercorns. She listened. Moments like these made her stay with my father, but also made her hate him just a little bit more. In the kitchen, I dumped the chanterelles onto the table. So many tiny flutes, I thought. Most of them were still good, only a few were mangled by the storm. I picked pine needles from their stems and used a brush to remove the loamy soil from their ridges. My dad trimmed the stems. He placed a large saute pan on the stove and moved a little footstool in front of it. On the left side of the stove, he laid out butter, salt, pepper, and old red wine and thyme. The mushrooms were all neatly lined on a tray, 3 layers deep. He asked me to stand on the stool and gave me a spoon. He told me to take half the stick of butter and add it to the pan. Once it was melted and bubbling a little, we added the chanterelles. He added a few pinches of salt and I did the same. We let the salt drop like rain. He told me to use the handle to move the pan over the flame and gently slide the mushrooms around in the pan. He told me to put the spoon under the mushrooms, lifting and turning them so that they'd get lightly browned on all sides. He cracked the pepper over them and added in the thyme. I moved the pan back and forth and stirred the mushrooms. He put the bottle of red wine to my nose and told me to smell it. It was sour and pinched my insides. When we added a splash to the pan, the sweetness of the mushrooms wafted up and around us. I imagined I was a multitude of Russian nesting dolls made of mushrooms. We added another pat of butter and cut the flame. I stirred the butter gently until it was creamy. He put his finger in the sauce and tasted it. I did the same. He told me to add a couple more pinches of salt, and I did. We spooned the mushrooms into 3 bowls, and he spread the table in the sunroom full of his larder. Pickled pig's feet, farmer's cheese, beets and horseradish, peppers and tomatoes. He opened a can each of smoked oysters and sardines and placed the cans directly on the table with forks resting alongside. My mom warmed the bread she had baked that morning. We sat down and ate a little of everything, combining the flavors and textures. The farmer's cheese with the mushrooms, swiping an oyster at the end of my fork through the creamy, buttery mushrooms, the tough meat of the pig's feet with the gentle crunch of the sardine bones, the spicy beets and horseradish cleared my nose to welcome each bite of chanterelle. This was the day I slighted fate and became a chef. I love that one, and some of those meals were my most vivid memories of childhood, and that's kind of how I wrote this book. And we can talk more about writing process if you guys want to when we do Q&A. But what I did was put all those most vivid memories just all together and compressed it. So, all right. So this next one is another one that's back at the farm, and it just may take me a second to find it. I think this book, we also have a chapter that's called chanterelles, but I'm going to read from one that's called meadow mushrooms. Okay, so again, talking about some of those vivid memories, I'm just going to start in a section here talking about the farmhouse. And this was kind of me more or less describing some of the essence combined in this story, along with some of the things my mom was doing, like canning, and some things that my dad was growing, and I just sort of combined it all because I think one of my favorite things to write about is that farmhouse and that time of my life. Our yeasty farmhouse was carbonated like a jar of sauerkraut that needed to be burped, always on the brink of explosion. That old place had its own central nervous system. It flushed out its systems below the ground with the things we did that didn't serve it, and pushed up the things that did. The xylem in the mulberry tree pulled up the rainwater from near the top of the slope where its roots went down under the ditch out front, where the hazelnuts were, and the water coursed through all the limbs, exiting through the millions of mouths on the undersides of its leaves. Because the roots were capillaries, and the garden pulsed like kidneys, and the trees breathed like lungs, and the gland-like fruits on the cherry tree shone like ornaments under lights, heavy and low, and when they pulled the branches down, I could pick most of them. The peaches were fuzzy like arm hair, and the raspberries were tiny beating hearts because the farmhouse was alive. Past the stubbly field at the rear of the barn, the horses made noises by clicking their shod hooves into the dirt. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The pigs grunted. In the yard, chickens clucked. A rooster aimed to peck my toes. When Mom took me outside with the damp sheets that she hung out to sunshine, she'd set me in the laundry basket so the rooster couldn't get me. She said, "He thinks those tools are corn kernels." I wasn't one for expressing myself, but I tried out. He's an asshole. I wasn't wrong because once he drew blood, I didn't like being around him. He was too unpredictable. But I got reprimanded and Mom said she was going to wash my mouth out with soap. Later she took me upstairs to the same bathroom where my sister would sneak out that window and took the bar of soap from the counter and told me to put it in my mouth. I looked at her, catching myself in the long mirror behind the sink, and the whites underneath the greens of my eyes shone with tears. "Do it," she said. And I put the bar of soap in my mouth. It didn't taste too bad, so I kept it there. And then she had to wrestle me to get it back out. I was fine eating the fucking soap. After a good summer rain, the meadow mushrooms sprouted out from the wild grasses in our yard. And I didn't know it then, but those were sex organs. White dots on a green canvas. They came in all sizes. The undersides of the caps were lined with gills that looked like the same as a fish's gills. We moved slow, being sure to collect every single one. We sliced them at their chunky stems with our pocket knives. I used the knife Dad gave me. He gave me the dull one since he thought I'd cut myself. Over the years, he'd give me hundreds more pocket knives, each time telling me, "Be careful, that's sharp." When we brought the mushrooms inside, Dad had us check the spores by conducting a test. He said to make sure that they were edible. First, we used a damp cloth to wipe off any grass or soil from them. Then we set them on a sheet of paper for several hours, after which we checked the imprint for the color. In this case, they were good. Mom got out the cast iron skillet and warmed it over the propane burner she'd set on the cutting board island. She added a knob of butter. When the butter got frothy, she added the sliced mushrooms. Meadow mushrooms were close to perfect. Not as good as morels, boletus, chanterelles, or even hen of the woods, but good enough that farmers replicated them in manure beds and mediums of the like to sell to stores as white button mushrooms. These were better than the kind you got at the store. Their bloodlines ran under our farm for who knows how far, probably as far as forever. They existed all year beneath the soil, grass, and seeds. They endured the harsh Midwestern freezes and thawed into soggy sponges in the spring. The summer heat and rain drove them to fruit. In the fall, they emerged one or two more times before going dormant for the winter. They thrived above our well and suffered over the septic. Their membranes spread in thin white strands, too thin for our eyes to see. Even when we made mud pies, we didn't notice them. After tasting the mud pie, though, we could detect that subtle savory quality that kept us craving our land. Because of that, I'd always want that land, forever. I still do. Close by were the rows of cedars whose root systems ran near the mulberries and hazelnuts to the north of the ditch. Over and back around to the cherry and peach trees where eventually Dad would set up Japanese beetle traps and spray the trees with pesticides as if he were the one flying the Agent Orange over the eastern jungles, spraying them within an inch of their lives, taking out so many things in the process. But still the mushrooms endured. Their intricate web systems cleared the farmhouse and met up again in the backyard near the apple and pear trees. They swung down under the clothesline, which I walked under, along the shadows, pretending I was a tightrope walker in the circus. I held out my arms like a semaphore, trying to catch my balance, signaling messages to my future self that said, "Remember this." Under the electric fence, they burrowed deeper. Underneath the tilled soil of the garden, they shifted towards the barn, around the foundation to the back, where in the last stall of the lean-to against the pole barn sat a large pile of manure, where Dad grew shiitake mushrooms from spores he bought in a catalog. Sometimes they grew and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes even the meadow mushrooms showed up there. Dad said it was from their spores being carried in the wind. Together in the barn, he showed me the fungus. I stood beside him with my hands in my pockets where I had a couple of arrowheads. I rubbed them with my thumb. He used a spade to pull up a fine layer of manure. At this point, the mash of soil and manure and whatever else he'd put in there didn't smell so bad. But when he turned it over, a sinister aroma rose. A yellow and white film coated the lumpy mass. The fibers of the white against the brown were no more visible than a dandelion or milkweed gone to seed, stuck in the moist soil. It was fuzzy. Where shiitake had come up, he clipped the fruited bodies. They were ready when the caps darkened at the top and fanned out into hues of violet purple and light brown around their edges. He liked them to be at least the diameter of a $50 and pulled a coin from his pocket to measure, along with various tissues, empty seed packets, pennies, nickels, quarters, and dander. He held the coin against the mushroom caps. "These ones are ready," he said. He harvested a pound's worth, and I proudly carried some back to the kitchen in my cupped hands. After 20 minutes, he had the mushrooms sliced thin with iceberg lettuce we grew in the garden. He fixed us 2 bowls of Maruchan ramen. To my bowl, he added the fresh sliced mushrooms, lettuce, and 1 egg yolk. I watched the egg whites drip through his thick fingers. Then he opened his hands to my bowl and let the yolk slide down to his fingertips before he released it in the center of my bowl. He added a spoonful of kikkoman soy sauce and a drop of fermented chili paste he'd made from the tiny red chilies in the garden. And so I'll stop there, but I should read the first sentence of the next one because I was just going to tell you guys this, but that first night I puked. It happened again several times. So, yeah, there was a couple times that I got sick from my dad's mushrooms that he grew in the manure. Probably should have had those cooked and not sliced raw. So if you think of anything from today, just remember, cook your mushrooms thoroughly. Yeah, but while I was writing those couple chapters of the books, those were ones that stuck with me afterwards that I felt like, oh, I really like those chapters. And so anyways, those are what I like to read when I do an event. But I'm open to whatever kind of questions you guys have. Yes?
Do you still have the farm?
No, my parents sold that in, oh my gosh, 1993. So I lived there from the time I was born in 79 to 93, and then we moved to a small neighborhood, because that was very much not a neighborhood area. Then we moved to a small, like, neighborhood place, suburb, and then eventually my mom and I moved to Chicago when I was out of high school, and ever since then have been trying to get back to something that felt like what that was. And so far, you know, my place up here in the woods feels the closest. It's like the perfect mix between what the farmhouse was and also my grandfather's farm. Recently, I was just looking on a map and noticed that if you go like directly due south, we're almost on the same like essentially lines as my grandfather's farm. So yeah, which is kind of cool to think about. So. Okay, and I'll just see when you, if you raise your hand and, yeah, okay.
So why the UP?
Well, yeah, it was kind of like, I knew I wanted to be in the North Woods. And so I was looking everywhere, Minnesota, northern lower Michigan, Wisconsin, UP, and I connected with a real estate agent up here, and he was, you know, sending me some, I kind of told him what I was thinking about doing and what I wanted, and, you know, he helped me look, and then I saw the place that I got online. It was affordable compared to all those other areas, and this was a project I was doing by myself. At the time, my mom, my dad, my sister, they all co-signed for me to get a second mortgage. And so yeah, it was 100% in investing in myself with that, and so I could afford it, and it was a beautiful property. Hunting camps. There's a variety of all sorts. Some with no water, some with propane, some with they're very different. But this cabin had a generator and a propane and a well and a septic, and it was set up by builders, which 30 years ago when it was being built, my neighbors told me that they were like shocked that the guy who built it had builders and architects coming back. And still to this day, after people see my road and they come to the cabin, they're like, how did they get cement trucks back here? Because we're 9.5 miles down a very bumpy logging road.
Wow.
So, but they did, and yeah, so it doesn't feel as off-grid as it is. So that worked out for essentially knowing that I wanted to host people there, because even though I had grown up on well and septic and, all of that kind of being cautious with our utilities and our resources, it had still been a long time. And also, I was young then. I was never the caretaker of those things, and if you've read my books, my dad was, and he didn't do a good job at that. So, but I've certainly over the years, this is my 7th year here now, I've learned a lot, and sometimes in the winter when I went back to Chicago, I've taken introduction to plumbing and introduction to electric and all sorts of workshops to, not so easy when something goes wrong to just call somebody to, hey, can you unstick our, unplug our pipes. Yeah, but so the UP, I chose it for that reason, and that we could afford it, and I got it sight unseen. We had a couple appointments to see it, and I had missed them because of work, and I just said, you know what, the pictures are beautiful, we have to get an inspection for the mortgage anyways, I'm just going to put in an offer and get it. And I'm really glad I didn't see it, because then if at the time we had seen it, my partner would have said, no way are we getting that place. And then the next year the pandemic hit, and places like that were not on the market so often anymore, and they shot up in price. And yeah, so I wouldn't be able to have it right now if any of those other like little things had happened. I always think of like some alternate outcome, and there were so many little things that led it to this. The first time I came out, the snow was still on the ground. It was like April 5th. It was plowed up until like this gate that my neighbors have set up, and my generator guy was leading me out for the first time, because he said, oh, well, I'll take you out there and I'll show you how to turn on the system. And so he immediately got stuck in the snow right after we opened the gate. So then we had to drive all the way out, get a tow strap, drive all the way back in, tow him out, and then I just ended up driving back home. But the whole ride back home, I was like, holy shit, how are we going to get people to come out here? So that became the one of the things I think about most of the time, just over the past, I don't know, maybe even longer than having milkweed, but over the past 10 years is, this is just paraphrasing, but the obstacle is the path, and it feels very much like that. Every time the obstacle is the path, and so, so that became, the path for us for milkweed. And so what changed was that it was like, okay, well, this isn't going to be a place where people can just come to like a bed and breakfast overnight. They're going to have to stay a couple days. So now we meet up and everybody caravans back, and it's sort of already sets the stage for like this nice sort of team building for all the strangers who are getting together every weekend. And most people, I can tell there's a couple people that feel a little grumpy after they've driven on that road, like what did this person just get us into? But most people get out and they're so amused by the trees and the road, and like the question is, how the hell did you find this place? So it's turned into like just a really beautiful part of the experience to be, so far out there. So, but yeah, so now the UP and the remoteness is a big part of it. Even when my friends from Marquette or people who have lived in the UP for a long time come out, they're like, wow, this actually is really far, And the people who have gotten lost the most are people from Marquette. Because I'm like, you have to come in this one specific way because, and they think, oh, they don't know. I'll figure it out. I know these roads. And every single time they get lost. So if you ever come out and you're from this area, please follow the directions. I always give people, I said, these are going to be old-fashioned directions, because it's like drive 5 miles this way and then take a left, on the stop sign that has the little mushroom sticker. We've put little things throughout the forest and on some of the signs so that people can identify where they're going. But yeah, so yeah, it's a good part. Okay. Any other questions? I know I'm just rambling now. Yes.
What's the name?
Well, milkweed is one of my favorite edibles to work with. So when it first comes out of the ground in the spring, you got a little tiny shoot that is edible. It gets fibrous pretty fast, but so I think that tastes like a combination of like sweet pea and asparagus. And then once it grows up a little bit more, then you have these the buds before they bloom, and those kind of like, people like to compare them to like a broccoli head or something of the sort. So those are nice to saute or use in any kind of preparation that you would use a broccoli or even just a green vegetable. And then the flowers are really cool and very beautiful, and they're such like a nice floral, like milkweed always has this nice floral element and also this slight bit of funk to it, like in a cheese sort of way. And I think that's because of the sap, but it's really cool. So the flowers make a beautiful garnish or added to salads or anything. And then once they turn to seed, everybody recognizes pods, and when those are anywhere from pretty small to 2 inches, as long as they're young and tender and pretty small, they're edible. If you make sure you cook them thoroughly. And so they have this almost like an okra without the slime, or I like to call them like a jalapeno popper without the heat, because they have like that silk and seed on the inside kind of gets melty. And so, yeah, it kind of has this cheese quality. So I love that edible, and that was one of my favorite things to get, from spring essentially until just a couple weeks ago. We couldn't really pick the pods anymore. So when I was thinking of names, that's what came to mind. And then lo and behold, we got out to the logging road, and it's just lined with milkweed, all from the beginning of it all the way to the cabin. And then there's just this big patch of milkweed growing on the side of the hill right when you look out the kitchen window. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, that's where that came from. So yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, a follow-up
Yes.
to that. Do you have the monarchs flying through there on their way to Stonington?
Yes, we have lots of monarchs, and it's beautiful. They will, I see the caterpillars obviously all over them. And then this year, we built a little pig paddock, and we built it with just some logs that we had bucked, and hanging from a bunch of them were their little cocoons, and you know how they look like this perfect green emerald jewel. Yeah, so I was able to watch them through that whole stage and, you know, take photos and such. And then, yeah, then they're all over, and I guess they're going somewhere. I didn't know it was to Stonington. Yeah. And so that's another thing I'm very conscious about, you know, how much I'm using, because I want to leave, well, I'm only serving 12 people a week, so they're not getting bowls and bowls of milkweed, plus that I've actually poisoned myself with it before. Yeah, I'm not serving bowls of it, but, you know, that's one of the main things I'm thinking about when I'm out foraging, is like, how can I be extremely conscious of what I'm using and also preserve this. So I make a milkweed flour miso, milkweed flour vinegars, and that way I'm only collecting, you know, a small amount, so I'm making small batches, like maybe a pint or a quart's worth, and then that stretches it out so I can use my milkweed flour miso in the spring, or, you know, whatever. So, but yeah, I use a lot of milkweed throughout the year in the menus by preserving it or fermenting it.
Have you planted anything there?
Yeah, we were actually talking about that today in the book club. I was here earlier today, and so it's so different than growing things in Indiana, where you just had to till and put down manure, and then, you know, things grew beautifully. So I have had some things, I have a couple raised garden beds, and I have some things that have worked out really nice. Like, I know when I plant tomatoes or zucchini, cucumbers do pretty good, radishes, but I have some beets that are, like, you know, still this size all the way from May when I planted them. And so I was like, well, I'm not gonna pick those, I'll just leave them there. But they'll just let them compost into that. And so some things do really great. It seems like every year my turnips immediately bolt. So I'm still learning. Sunflowers do really well. I'm sure if you're growing things out here, you guys know and have plenty of practice. I think that's one of the beautiful things. I remember in 2019 when I first came out here and went to the farmer's market. It didn't have a lot of farmers there. It did have more than what we've had lately, but there was such beautiful produce, and I thought it was much more beautiful than what I had seen a lot of times in Chicago. And I think because of the limited, my theory is that there's the limited growing season, so, you know, the farmers are trying to make whatever they are growing in that window extremely beautiful. And then there's also not millions of people. There's only so many people here that they can sell to, so they want to make sure that it's beautiful, because, like, there's not a choice. They're not going to sell it because the volume of people are just going to buy it anyway. So, you know, it's so impressive. And I think one of the great things about when people do come to milkweed, you know, because they'll say, oh, this cabbage dish is so amazing, who would have thought cabbage? And I say, like, well, it's not just because I made it nice, it's also because, like, the cabbage from Full Plate Farms or Seeds and Spores, like, they're growing really amazing cabbage. And so it's starting with that, you know, and then of course there's some of the things I do to it, but, you know, I'm not doing too much to it. It's just like, yeah, I remember the first time I tasted cabbage from Full Plate Farms. It was just like the best tasting cabbage I had ever had. So I'm so impressed by the farmers out here. So that's where I was in between these events. I went to Seeds and Spores to get our CSA. So I like working with them. Yeah.
Are you still involved in the Chicago restaurant scene at all?
No, after my first season here in 2019, I went back to my restaurant Elizabeth, and I sort of knew this was going to work out. So I had about 6 months there, and I asked my office manager if he was interested in taking over the restaurant, because this was a long time plan in the making, you know, but it was kind of like my hope that I was gonna be able to get out and change my path. And so I asked him if he wanted it, and he said, well, let me talk to my wife, and he came back a couple days later and said, yes, and so I just gave him the restaurant. I said, you can keep the IP, you can keep the name, but we have to announce that I'm leaving, you know, if you want to change it someday, you can change it. But it wasn't this tiny little strip mall, it was kind of a dilapidated building, like Elizabeth had become a destination spot, but it wasn't a fancy restaurant. The food was fancy and we did our best with the environment, but it was by no means one of those like multi-million-dollar restaurants. If I was going to end up selling it, it would have been only for the liquor license and nothing else. So I was like, you just take it. I don't even want to think about the headache of any of the things, you know. So then the pandemic hit, and so then, you know, they did take out, and I stayed pretty much out of it, and then eventually they reopened in 2021 and operated, and then we announced to everybody that I was gone, and they did fine for a while, and then they recently closed down and reconcepted because people didn't always get the memo that I wasn't there anymore, so they were still kind of coming in and expecting to see me. So they changed it all up, and so they're still doing well. They just got their Michelin-starred, but that was my closest attachment still to the restaurant industry of Chicago, was just by proximity being friends with the people who I gave the restaurant to. And then sometimes I would go back in the winters and teach in-person classes. So I would do like, you know, 8 weeks, teach them in person, and I would do it there. Sometimes host pop-ups, not always there, but just elsewhere. But then last year my mom passed away, and so she and I had a 2-flat in Chicago. And so I was kind of like, I don't need this place anymore. I had it mostly for her. So I ended up selling it this winter, and for years I had wanted to do a full season here, a full winter. And so I was like, well, this is going to be the year. So I have not too many plans yet of exactly how I'm going to do it on that logging road, but I know they'll involve a snowmobile and maybe a skid steer, and I'm not sure what else, cross-country skis and snowshoes. We're a mile from Highway 13, but unfortunately there's no road that goes through. So we have to go out and around to get to that. So, you know, that now it's 28 miles. However, in the winter, if there's snow covering everything, we should be able to walk that. We'll see. We'll have cars parked at a couple exits. But, you know, when all my friends say, oh my God, you're crazy, I'm like, well, you know, this is not the Oregon Trail. Like, you know, it's the UP. It's not like this is Alaska, you know. So we don't even have mountains. I mean, we have little ones, but you know what I mean. Yes.
Is there anything you miss about living in Chicago?
Not really. I think I was wanting to get out of the city for quite some time. I miss my friends, and some of my nieces are there, and my dad's in Northwest Indiana. So being close to them, but anymore, I feel like in the winters, having to go home between caring for my mom and getting done with the season here, I was usually just so tired that, and then in the winters I also write, so I really kind of didn't want to leave my house. So a lot of those things that the city has, like, you know, the restaurants and the cultural and arts and all the little things that are always going on, I didn't want to be a part of. You know, if I was going to meet up with friends, I was like, you have to come over because I cannot I can't go out. I'm too tired. So yeah. Yes.
Is there something that you thought would be really difficult that surprisingly hasn't been? Or is there something you were really worried about that was like, oh, I'm doing this and it wasn't that bad?
Yeah. I think for how remote we are, it's become so normal to come out for 2 hours once a week to come here, or to, run out and do the errands. We try to group everything so that it's only once a week that we have to go out, aside from going and picking up guests and taking them back. But that ride isn't so far. But so that, like, I think people come and they're like, holy shit, that's just crazy that you guys are getting stuff back here. But so that's become, yeah, I think that was something I was very worried about in the beginning, particularly the roads, because they can be very, you never know. There's a couple culverts that every once in a while we have to wear our waders when we're going out and get in there and dig out the culvert because the beavers have, plugged it. And so, but sometimes they work fast. And if a big rainstorm comes, then the area fills up, comes over the road and washes out the road. So that's happened twice where, we've gotten stuck back there, and luckily I have the most amazing contractor that over the years has helped me. It took me a couple years to find him, but once I did, he's done everything from little projects, to show me how to change something in the house that is rather simple, to big projects like replacing a culvert or, fixing the road washout. So, yeah, he's been really amazing. But yeah, so that's something that maybe for the winters that skid steer might come in handy someday, so we can repair our own roads. But yeah, so I've learned more about like road infrastructure than I ever expected. Now I feel pretty confident about what you have to do to like actually, create a nice driving path, and how you create the ditch and build it up and grade it. I haven't done it yet, but I am manifesting. I can see myself doing it. So, I'll go from being a writer and a chef to maybe just working on roads. We'll see. Yeah.
So you have an idea for a new book?
Yeah, so I almost, once field work was done, I started writing the next one. And so I was due to write a cookbook per my contract with my editor, and I just work with a small publisher out of Evanston, Illinois. And when I signed up for Bryn the Place, I also signed on for a cookbook. Then we decided to do field work next, and so I still owe him that cookbook, but I just don't want to write a cookbook because they're really hard and take a lot of not that writing a narrative isn't hard, that's hard too, but like finding, you have to do the photography or find a photographer and do all the conversions, and then you have to have recipes in the first place. And while I have a lot of recipes for creating like baked goods or things that are a bit more scientific, a lot of it's just like cooking, throw this and that in there and the other thing. So, yes, that's, and when you're making something for a cookbook, generally something that they expect to sell is going to be recipes that are geared towards somebody at home being able to make them. And the way my food is you pick this wild thing and then you turn it to a miso, and then a year later you pick this other wild thing and then you cook that one with that one, and then you put this other thing on it that you preserve. And I could change all that up, but then it wouldn't be a buckwheat cookbook, So, yeah, so anyways, where am I going with this? Oh, the next book. So I'm writing a narrative cookbook. And in both books, I've talked about Jenny's Cafe, which was the Slavic restaurant my parents owned in Gary, Indiana from 1975 to 1979. And so that has a lot of family recipes, a lot of historical content just being from, the steel town of Gary, Indiana, and a lot of the Eastern European roots there. And so that is the book, and it's the stories of my family. And then in this part 2 is all the recipes, but as my mom and dad have told me them through interviews. So I've sat, over the past couple of years, I sat them down and said, how did Busha make the borscht? And so then my dad would tell me, well, she took 5 pounds of beets and she peeled them and she boiled them in water. And that's, the recipes are written out as a transcript. So I think that'll be, for some people, be very fun, and for some people, very annoying. But for me, it's more of, that it's fun to write it that way. It was fun to connect with my parents that way. And also, I think of it as a prequel because, like I said, both of my books talk about that restaurant. And I love the stories that I've been told over the years about that time and place right before I was born have been so formative. And I have some cool documentary footage of a folklorist from Indiana University. He's written a bunch of books. He actually wrote one about the UP folklore. His name's Richard Dorson. He ended up doing a documentary about my parents' restaurant. So I have this cool kind of like side project to go with it, and I've talked to Indiana University and asked them if I kind of used that documentary of his and sort of weaved it to help tell the story of their restaurant. So that's the next one. My editor yesterday demanded me turn in all the materials I have right now because I haven't turned it in yet. And so I've been telling him for like 4 months now. I'm about 2/3 of the way through, but I am. I have to finish editing it and write a couple more recipes, but so I'm close. But yeah, once I got here this year in April, it's just been nonstop. I haven't had a chance to work on it. So my plan is, once the season's over, to even though winter will still be a lot of work, but not in the same way as it is now. So hopefully I'll get that finished up, and once I get it finally turned in, it takes about a year. So we're hoping sometime in 2026 it'll come out. Maybe the end of 2026. And then after that, I have another memoir planned. So I love writing. It's kind of my way of escaping and decompressing, and so, yeah, my plan is to keep writing. Yeah, I think we have time for at least one other question. Yes.
Since you'll be, full-time, you burn out, do you anticipate having any winter openings? Like, are you thinking?
Yeah. So we actually already have some that we have gotten deposits for from some of our guests that are like multiple time repeats. They're like, we want to do that. And I've just kind of told them, we should have 6 people. They should all be friends. Because usually we host 10 to 12 guests. In this case, we're like, we'll only do the in-cabin rooms and all the guests should know each other. So a couple of my longtime guests have booked a few weekends. So I have one in December, 2 in January, and 1 in February. But they've booked it with the caveat of knowing, like, this might not happen. Like, we're gonna do our best to get it ready and make sure we can do it safely and get you back there. But also my partner and I are planning that there's also a possibility that like we need to be stocked up for at least a good couple months to know that if we get snowed in, like, we're not gonna be able to do our weekly store run, so we're kind of planning for all options and we'll just see what happens. But I think a long-term goal would be able to host at least a few weekends in the winter to do, snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. There's a lake nearby that we can clear off and people can go ice skating. Just to do like that whole winter thing up here would be really beautiful. So yeah, my partner has some horses and they're moving the horses, right now, we're building a little paddock, and the horses are moving up in a couple months, so we'll have a few horses, and they're Canadian warm blood, so I think that they'll do really well out there, and the plan is to, pull people on little wagons and do hay rides and stuff, so we'll see what happens. Yeah. All right.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Megan. If you have any more questions, want to talk to Lane, they're going to be outside signing books. So you can ask those questions. But again, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.